Hey there, welcome to LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Nathan Fox. I'm one of the co-founders of LSATdemon.com and our weekly podcast, Thinking LSAT. I have an email here. This is going to be a little bit of a different show, just me. And I'm going to read a couple of lengthy emails. I'm going to start with a shorter email from one of our listeners, Alondra, who says, "Hi, I've been binge watching your podcasts and they have helped me a lot. By listening to your podcast, I could already see what I was doing wrong and why my previous studies have failed. For example, tutors I have had in the past told me to read the question first and then read the passage, or to quickly skim passages to get a general idea and move to the questions quickly. And with this advice, I would score around the high 140s. However, I recently found out that I'm dyslexic, and I have been my whole life. I always thought everyone had trouble reading the same way I did. Unfortunately, I found out I was dyslexic when I was at the end of my undergraduate journey at UCI. I'm guessing that's UC Irvine. And I ended up with a GPA of 3.7 and not around 3.9 as I had hoped. My question is, should I retake a practice LSAT with the extended time accommodation I have received to know my real starting point and from there start studying? Or do I automatically start reviewing lessons and take a practice test later on? Also, do you have any extra helpful tips for people who are dyslexic? Thank you so much." Again, that's from listener Alondra. Alondra, thank you for writing in. First thing is, if you're accommodated for dyslexia or anything else, if you've gotten your official accommodations approved by LSAC, then you should start practicing. All your practice sections should definitely be with those accommodations. It's critical that you practice the way you're going to play on game day. So 53 minutes is a game changer, or 70 minutes if you've got double time. It makes a world of difference, and you should definitely start practicing with that extra time if you are granted it. I don't know anything, Alondra. Well, I didn't know anything about dyslexia, but I want to learn. And so I talked to Demon staff, and I ended up getting two emails, one from the family member of a Demon staffer, one from a Demon student who will be applying in the upcoming cycle. And they both had some helpful advice about dyslexia. So this is advice for dyslexic LSAT students from a student with dyslexia and from she's actually a teacher with dyslexia. I'll start with the teacher. This is not an LSAT teacher, but it says, "I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was in about third grade, so I have my lived experiences with it. I'm also an elementary school teacher who on a daily basis helps students with a variety of learning disabilities. The first thing I would say is don't be shy about requesting the help you need. I know people who have dyslexia and have gotten approved for extra time on the LSAT. I'm not sure about the actual bar exam though." So there's Alondra, you've already gotten your accommodations for the LSAT. That's great. You might want to call your state bar and talk about what the accommodations look like at that point, just for your own knowledge. "I see it a lot," says this elementary school teacher with dyslexia. "I see it a lot that people either don't have experience trying to get their needs met, or they think the chance is so small that they don't try. I also know people who feel badly about having extra time on the test. The reality is dyslexia is a learning disability that essentially slows down the processing time of your brain, and receiving accommodations you deserve just puts you on an equal playing field as with everyone else. When it comes to studying and preparing for tests, I personally always had a much harder time getting ready for tests and presentations, etc. Anything that involves memorizing facts and data are hard because my brain mixes up numbers and letters on paper and in my head. What I've learned is that I can't get by with memorizing the information. I truly need to learn it." Good news for you, Alondra. The LSAT is not even a test of memorization anyway. So it's a test of practicing a skill. So get really good at the skill of essentially playing the LSAT. It's like it's a game, but it is not a test of memory at all, which apparently is good for people with, or at least one person who is writing in with dyslexia. I'm sure as a future lawyer, it would only benefit those studying for their test to actually learn. Yeah, that's what we're all about, is really learning the LSAT. So that's good news, I think, for you, Alondra. I always found ways to connect things to my own life so it would stay meaningful and make sense to me. My goal of studying for a standardized test was always to get to the point where I could answer questions logically and the correct answer would make sense. And that's, I mean, we teach that to all of our students, Alondra, that the LSAT just makes sense. That's what we're all about. So it's not a test of memorization at all. It's just read it carefully and make it make sense. So this correspondent with dyslexia says, if I was able to build a deep enough understanding of the content area, I could figure out the questions I didn't have memorized. Yeah, and again, there is nothing you can memorize on the LSAT. It really is only just practice and get so good at the LSAT that you can figure them out. Something I often work on with students is mindfulness around standardized tests. And I think that goes a long way for those with dyslexia. Due to the nature of dyslexia and having numbers and letters jumble in your head, taking short mindfulness breaks can be extra helpful. Even just a short pause to close your eyes and take 3 deep breaths in and out can help relieve some of the frustration that builds up from not being able to memorize all the information you need to know. Well, again, it is not a test of memorization, but students certainly do get frustrated. So this also is a tip that would apply to anybody. I mean, taking a break, taking some deep breaths, that sounds like excellent advice for everyone, but this is specific advice for test takers with dyslexia from a teacher with dyslexia. So try the mindfulness thing, Alondra. We have some brief meditations that are now built into the drilling function on the Demon. I would encourage you to take advantage of those when they pop up instead of just skipping them. Okay, this email's almost done. I am not sure if this will help anyone, but I do want to say to anyone out there with dyslexia or another learning disability, I know how much harder you have to work to get to the places you want to go, but don't give up. It will all be worth it. I know you can do it. Smiley face. And that's from an elementary school teacher who is a family member of a Demon freelancer. Thank you so much for submitting that very helpful email. I hope it was helpful to Alondra. It was helpful to me. All right, we got one more email here. This is from a Demon student who's applying this cycle, who provided some helpful points. Okay, 1, know your diagnosis. The DSM-4 was used to diagnose mental conditions until it was replaced by the DSM-5 in 2013. If your diagnosis was pre-2013, it may be worth being evaluated again. Treatments vary. And then we have a link that we'll post on the show notes. So this Demon student says, I was evaluated at age 10 and then again at age 29. Over those 2 decades, my diagnosis changed, and I had developed several habits that newer treatments have helped replace. Good sleep is critical, he says. I run my own business, I have academic responsibilities, and I have a kid. If I can prioritize my rest, anyone can. Get your rest. Okay, so 2 tips in one there. Know your diagnosis and get your rest. Second tip, if you're concerned or unsure whether you have dyslexia, talk to your doctor about seeing a qualified professional ASAP. He says, but before you do that, talk to your insurer. The evaluations are expensive and they aren't always covered, especially if you're on Medicaid in your state. Next, he says, call your doctor for a referral, then get an appointment scheduled somewhere, preferably somewhere that they take your insurance. He says, I emphasize somewhere because the waiting lists at neuropsych facilities can get long. My neuropsych facility forced me to schedule 3 months out. If you're in a rush to make a deadline and you can afford it, you might also consider paying out of pocket to get evaluated somewhere more convenient. But for reference, my evaluation, he says, was $980. Jeez. So, okay, there could be, if you're not yet diagnosed, properly, it could be a bit of a long haul there, and you want to start making phone calls and appointments sooner rather than later. Our healthcare system, of course, is such a mess. It might be real hard to get this covered. Once you do have the diagnosis, he says, get your paperwork submitted to LSAC right away. He says, LSAC firmly rejected my appeal to have accommodations considered for the March 2022 test. I was less than 48 hours past the deadline. Don't make my mistake. So they're serious about, you have to send in your accommodations before the registration deadline for the test. And the registration deadline for the test is like 6 weeks before the test. So if you have not submitted your documentation before the deadline, you're screwed. He says it was 48 hours, fewer than 48 hours before the deadline or past the deadline. And it's just hard rule. If you're over the deadline, sorry, you have to wait for the next test in order to get your accommodations. Understand how the diagnosis affects your capacity and plan your studies accordingly. This LSAT student with dyslexia says, one person's dyslexia is not another's. Treatments that work for some may not work for you. I love to read, he says, but I'm slow as shit at it. It takes me significant time to get through dense material, but when I do, I understand it. This helped me tailor my study schedule toward prioritizing reading comprehension. Logical reasoning and games came much more easily to me. But for example, if you have dysgraphia, which is sometimes diagnosed as dyslexia, you might struggle to make predictions or diagram a rule or world in logic games. Know how your condition affects you and tailor your study plan accordingly. Wow, I never knew that there were like different types of dyslexia. Okay, yeah, so learn as much as you possibly can about your diagnosis, no matter what it is. He says, your condition, dyslexia, will almost certainly require additional time for review after drilling, timed sections, or practice tests. He says, Nathan's 1-hour LSAT from the Demon Lessons, it's a blog post that I wrote a while back about how to structure your time if you were going to give it one high quality hour every day. He says that turned into 2-hour LSAT for me, and it paid dividends. Dyslexia is not an excuse to suck at using your calendar. Manage your time wisely. All right, this is coming from a dyslexic LSAT student telling you it will take longer and you shouldn't make an excuse of your dyslexia. You're going to have to manage your time better than most. All right. He says extra time is helpful, but it won't fix a poor understanding. He says, you've presumably got the extra time you need now, whether that's 53 or 70 minutes, great. But if you're still struggling to understand the test, the extra time will only help so much. Don't let your condition become a crutch for understanding the material. You still have to develop the skills to master the test. Set your demon time settings to match your accommodations, start practicing, focus on the question in front of you, and get it right. I endorse that idea for all LSAT students. I'm just not about giving you tips and tricks and trying to help you game the test without understanding it. You have to understand the LSAT. Really no excuses or shortcuts for that. Last tip, he says, get real with yourself. There are tons of career paths outside of law where neuroatypical processors like dyslexics can contribute in massive, meaningful ways. If you can't clearly articulate why you want to be a lawyer, it might be time to find a different pursuit. That doesn't have to be a bad thing. Lawyers and law students read a shit ton. I'm no law student, he says. He's just an LSAT student with dyslexia. But I can't imagine it's easier to be a law student with dyslexia. If you have any doubts at all, I think it would be well worth your time to talk to attorneys, other law students, or law professors in your area to find out whether you're prepared for the workload. Talking to law professors in my area helped me a lot. Again, that's from a demon student with dyslexia who will be applying in the upcoming cycle. Alondra, I hope that was useful advice. Thank you very much to both of our correspondents with dyslexia. I personally learned some things that I did not know, and I hope everybody found that helpful. If you have questions, follow-ups about dyslexia or anything else, you can email daily@lsatdemon.com. Thanks for listening.